In a ranch soaked in wealth and arrogance, a rich Arab mocks a poor girl with a cruel challenge. "If you touch that horse, the ranch is yours," he jeers. To everyone's shock, the wild beast bows to her gentle hand. What follows rips apart reputations and exposes the rot hidden beneath luxury. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. I promise that this will be the best story you will hear in your life. The summer sun beat down on the exclusive Blackwood Ranch estate, where wealth flowed as freely as the champagne. Catherine Reed stood quietly at the edge of the gathering, her weathered boots and simple jeans, a stark contrast to the designer outfits that adorned the guests of Texas oil magnate Richard Blackwood. At just 22, Catherine's small frame and unassuming presence made her nearly invisible among the elite crowd, exactly as she preferred. "Another spectacular event, Richard." A guest raised his glass. "Though I must say that new stallion of yours seems to be giving your trainers quite the challenge." Richard Blackwood, a man whose fortune was matched only by his ego, laughed heartily. "Thunder is worth every penny of the $2 million I paid for him. Pure Arabian bloodline. A shame he's proving too much for my staff to handle. 3 trainers injured already," another guest chimed in. "My cousin at Wellington Equestrian says that horse is cursed." Catherine's attention sharpened. She had heard whispers about the magnificent black stallion that had arrived at Blackwood Ranch 3 weeks ago, how he'd been labeled dangerous, unmanageable, a lost cause. Such labels often mask deeper truths. Perhaps what that horse needs is a gentle hand. "Not force," she said quietly, not intending to be heard. But in that moment, a lull in conversation allowed her words to carry. Richard Blackwood turned, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the young woman. "And you think you have this gentle hand, Miss Reed, Catherine Reed?" She straightened her shoulders slightly. "I work with Sarah at the community stables. Downtown." The mention of Sarah's name, a respected veterinarian who occasionally tended to Blackwood's less valuable horses, was the only reason. Catherine had received an invitation to this fundraiser. She was here representing the struggling community equestrian program that provided therapy for at-risk youth and veterans. A smirk spread across Richard's face. "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have an expert in our midst." His mock bow elicited chuckles from the crowd. "Tell me, Miss Reed, what makes you think you could succeed where professional trainers with decades of experience have failed?" Catherine felt heat rise to her cheeks but held his gaze. Sometimes the professionals are so focused on dominance that they miss the conversation. "Conversation? With a horse?" Richard's laugh was sharp. "Next you'll tell me you whispered to them, something like that," she replied, evenly. A gleam appeared in Richard's eyes, the look of a man who had just conceived of fresh entertainment for his guests. "Well then," he announced, "I propose a wager. If Miss Reed here can not only touch Thunder, but ride him within 7 days, I'll donate $100,000 to her little community program." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Such a sum would save the program from imminent closure. "And if I fail?" Catherine asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Then you publicly admit that your gentle methods are nothing but fantasy, and you endorse my training facility as the premier equestrian center in Texas." His smile didn't reach his eyes. After all, reputation is everything in this business. Catherine knew that such an endorsement would effectively end her career working with troubled horses. Blackwood's methods, while legal, prioritized results over welfare, competition over connection. Everything she stood against. "You have yourself a deal." "Mr. Blackwood," she said, extending her hand. As their hands clasped, Catherine caught a glimpse of something in Richard's expression, a flicker of surprise quickly masked by confidence. He hadn't expected her to accept. "Excellent. The entertainment portion of our evening is now scheduled for next Saturday." He addressed his guests with theatrical flair. "I suggest placing your bets, ladies and gentlemen." As the crowd dispersed, an elegant woman approached Catherine. Elizabeth Blackwood, Richard's wife of 20 years, carried herself with the practiced poise of someone who had spent decades in the spotlight. "That was either very brave or very foolish," Elizabeth said, her voice low. "My husband doesn't make wagers he can lose." "I don't make wagers I can't win," Catherine replied. A hint of a smile touched Elizabeth's lips. "I'll have James show you to the stables. You might as well meet your challenge now. The walk to the stables was long enough for doubt to creep into Catherine's mind. What had she done? Her grandmother Ruby's voice echoed in her memory. Pride makes fools of the wisest among us. But this wasn't just about pride. The community program needed that money desperately. The Blackwood stables were state-of-the-art. Pristine stalls, advanced security systems, climate control. James, the stable manager, led her to the farthest stall, separated from the others. "He's in there," James said, his voice tinged with respect and fear. "Been isolated since he nearly trampled Marcus last week." Catherine approached slowly. Through the bars she could see the magnificent creature, 17 hands of rippling black muscle, his coat gleaming even in the dim light. Thunder paced restlessly, his movements betraying tension in every line of his powerful body. "What's his story?" she asked, not taking her eyes off the stallion. James shrugged. Mr. Blackwood bought him from some fancy European breeder. Horse came with championships and a mean streak. "All I know is nobody gets near him without him trying to take their head off." "That's not a mean streak," Catherine murmured. "That's trauma." As James walked away, Catherine settled onto a bale of hay across from Thunder's stall. She didn't approach, didn't try to enter. She simply sat, pulled out her worn leather journal, and began to sketch the stallion. An hour passed. Thunder occasionally glanced her way, but mostly continued his agitated pacing. Catherine remained quietly observing, documenting his movements, the way his ears flicked, how he favored his right hind leg slightly. The sun was setting when Ruby's pickup truck pulled into the driveway. Catherine's grandmother stepped out, her 70 years etched into the lines of her face, but not reflected in her steady gait. "Sarah called," Ruby said by way of explanation. "Said you'd gotten yourself into another impossible situation." Catherine smiled ruefully. "It's not impossible, just challenging." Ruby peered into the stall at Thunder, who had stopped pacing to watch them warily. He's carrying old pain." "Not just in body." "I know," Catherine closed her journal. "I'll need the old methods." Ruby's expression grew serious. "Catherine, you haven't used those since Phoenix." Catherine unconsciously touched the scar that ran along her collarbone, a permanent reminder of her failure 3 years ago with a traumatized Mustang. "I know. That wasn't your fault," Ruby said gently. "You were young, impatient. And a horse nearly died because of it." Catherine stood, brushing hay from her jeans. "I won't make the same mistake again." As they walked back to the truck, Ruby placed a weathered hand on Catherine's shoulder. "Come home tonight. Tomorrow we'll bring Grandfather's book." That night, in the small farmhouse that had been in the Reed family for 4 generations, Catherine sat at the kitchen table while Ruby retrieved a wooden box from the top shelf of her closet. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. "Your great-grandfather learned these methods from the Comanche," Ruby explained, though Catherine had heard the story many times. "Before rehabilitation programs and horse whisperers became fashionable. This knowledge is sacred, Catherine. Not for show." "This isn't about showing off," Catherine insisted. "It's about saving our program. And maybe saving that horse too." Ruby opened the journal to reveal handwritten notes, symbols, and diagrams, techniques passed down through generations of healers and horsemen. "Then you'll need to remember the first principle," Ruby said. "Before you can heal any creature, you must first recognize its sovereignty. That stallion doesn't need to be broken. He needs to be heard." Catherine nodded, running her fingers over the faded ink of her ancestors. 7 days to earn his trust. 7 days to remember your own, Ruby corrected. As Catherine fell asleep that night, her mind filled with images of Thunder, his eyes wild with fear disguised as aggression, his powerful body coiled like a spring. Beyond the challenge, beyond the wager, she sensed something significant was at stake. This wasn't just about saving a community program anymore. It was about remembering who she was, what she was capable of, and perhaps redemption for them both. Dawn had barely broken when Catherine arrived at Blackwood Ranch the next morning. She carried a small bag containing her great-grandfather's journal, a pouch of herbs, and a simple rope halter handcrafted by Ruby. No bits, no spurs, no whips, tools that Thunder would associate with pain and dominance. The security guard gave her a skeptical look, but opened the gate. Word of the wager had spread quickly among the staff. Catherine could feel their eyes on her, as she made her way to Thunder's stall, their expressions ranging from amusement to pity. To her surprise, James was already there, mucking out the adjacent stall. "Mr. Blackwood says I'm to assist you however you need," he said, though his tone suggested he expected little to come of her efforts. "Also asked me to remind you that the clock is ticking." 6 days left. Catherine nodded, setting her bag down. "I'd like to move him to the round pen, please." James laughed. "Ma'am, it took 3 men with tranquilizers to get him into this stall." "You want him out in the open?" "Yes," she said simply. "But first I need to know everything about his routine. What he eats, when, who handles his food, what sounds seem to trigger him." Reluctantly, James shared what little they knew. Thunder was fed twice daily, always by different handlers because nobody wanted the assignment twice. He reacted violently to certain sounds: metal clanking, whistling, the crack of leather. His previous owners had provided minimal information, only that he was a champion show horse who had developed behavioral issues following an accident. What kind of accident? Catherine pressed. James shrugged. "They didn't specify. Just said he became unmanageable afterward." Catherine spent that first morning simply sitting near Thunder's stall, occasionally reading from her great-grandfather's journal, but mostly observing. The stallion watched her warily, maintaining his distance. When she softly hummed an old melody Ruby had taught her, his ears flicked forward briefly before resuming their pinned position. At noon, Richard Blackwood appeared, immaculately dressed in riding clothes, though Catherine suspected he rarely rode anymore. "No progress." "I see," he remarked with thinly veiled satisfaction. "Perhaps you'd like to concede early. Save yourself some embarrassment." "It's only been a few hours, Mr. Blackwood," Catherine replied evenly. "Building trust takes time." "Time you don't have," he reminded her with a smirk. "My investors are planning quite the gathering for Saturday. I'd hate for them to be disappointed." After he left, Catherine noticed something she hadn't before. Thunder's agitation had increased markedly during Richard's brief visit. The stallion had pressed himself against the far wall of his stall. Nostrils flared, a tremor running through his powerful frame. "Interesting," she thought, making a note in her journal. By late afternoon, Catherine had convinced James to help her prepare the round pen with fresh bedding and water. She requested that Thunder's evening feeding be done in the pen rather than his stall, creating an incentive for movement. "We'll leave all the gates open between his stall and the pen," she explained. "No pressure, no force, just an invitation." James looked doubtful but complied. "For your funeral," he muttered. As the sun began to set, Catherine positioned herself on a stool outside the stall, the gate set in a pathway leading to the round pen where fresh hay awaited. Then she began to read aloud from her great-grandfather's journal, her voice soft and melodic. The words weren't important, it was the cadence, the gentle rhythm that mattered. Thunder's ears swiveled toward her occasionally, though he made no move to leave his stall. "He won't come out tonight," James said as darkness fell. "You're wasting your time." "Then I'll try again tomorrow," Catherine replied simply. She returned to Ruby's farm that night, discouraged but not defeated. Over a simple dinner, she shared her observations with her grandmother. "He's intelligent and observant," Catherine said, "and he has a specific reaction to Richard Blackwood, fear disguised as aggression." Ruby nodded thoughtfully. "Animals remember those who hurt them." "You think Blackwood is responsible for Thunder's trauma?" "I think there's more to this wager than a simple challenge," Ruby replied. "Your mother always said I was suspicious, but in my experience, men like Richard Blackwood don't make bets unless they're certain they'll win." The next morning, Catherine arrived even earlier, hoping to observe Thunder without the distraction of the busy stable. To her surprise, the stallion was no longer in his stall. Panic gripped her briefly until she followed the open gates and found Thunder standing in the round pen, cautiously sampling the hay. James appeared beside her, clearly astonished. He went in on his own sometime during the night. "Never seen anything like it." Catherine kept her distance, settling on a stool outside the round pen. For hours she simply sat, occasionally reading aloud, sometimes humming the melody that seemed to catch Thunder's attention. By midday she had moved her stool to just inside the gate. Thunder watched her, alert but no longer showing signs of immediate aggression. Progress continued slowly over the next 2 days. Catherine gradually decreased the distance between them, always respecting Thunder's boundaries, never pushing when he showed signs of discomfort. She discovered that he responded positively to certain herbs Ruby had provided, the scent seeming to calm him. When she scattered these in the bedding, he would lower his head, his breathing becoming more regular. On the fourth day, a breakthrough occurred. Catherine had been sitting cross-legged in the center of the round pen, softly reciting one of the ancient calming chants from the journal, when Thunder approached her voluntarily for the first time. He stopped several feet away, nostrils flared as he took in her scent. Catherine remained perfectly still, continuing her gentle chant, her eyes lowered submissively. The stallion extended his neck, huffing a warm breath that stirred her hair. Then, miracle of miracles, he lowered his head slightly, a gesture of tentative trust. "Good boy," Catherine whispered, fighting back tears of relief. "That's right. No one's going to hurt you here." Later that afternoon, Elizabeth Blackwood appeared at the round pen, watching with undisguised interest as Catherine worked. "The staff are talking," Elizabeth said. "They say you've made more progress in 4 days than the trainers did in 3 weeks. Catherine chose her words carefully. Thunder just needed someone to listen to him. Elizabeth's perfectly maintained exterior cracked slightly. "You truly believe animals can communicate their needs?" "I believe all living beings tell their stories if we pay attention." Catherine studied the elegant woman. "Some just hide their pain better than others." Something flickered in Elizabeth's eyes, recognition perhaps, before she composed herself again. "Richard has invited several journalists to Saturday's event. He's quite confident in the outcome." "And what outcome do you expect, Mrs. Blackwood?" Elizabeth glanced at Thunder, who was watching them from a distance. "I've learned not to expect anything. That way I'm rarely disappointed." She turned to leave, then paused. "Be careful, Miss Reed. My husband doesn't like to lose at anything." That night, Catherine shared her concerns with Ruby. "There's something not right about this whole situation. The way Elizabeth warned me, the staff's surprise at Thunder's progress. It's like they expected him to be unmanageable." Ruby considered this. "Have you looked into Thunder's history? His previous owners?" "James said he came from Europe, but the paperwork is in Blackwood's office." "I can't exactly ask to see it." "Then perhaps someone else can," Ruby suggested, reaching for the phone. The next morning, day 5, Catherine arrived to find Thunder agitated, pacing nervously in the round pen. James met her at the gate, his expression grim. "Something happened last night," he said quietly. "Mr. Blackwood came by with some men I didn't recognize. They were here for about an hour. Thunder's been like this ever since." Catherine's heart sank as she observed the stallion. All the progress of the past few days seemed undone. When she entered the pen, Thunder retreated to the farthest corner, his eyes wild with renewed fear. "What did they do to him?" she demanded. James shook his head. "I don't know. I wasn't allowed near the stables, but—" He hesitated, lowering his voice. "I heard sounds, metal clanking, a whistle." "The same triggers you asked about." Catherine felt sick. They deliberately triggered his trauma. "Mr. Blackwood wouldn't," James began, then stopped. Unable to complete the denial even to himself, Catherine spent the entire day attempting to rebuild Thunder's trust. By sunset, she had managed to approach within 10 feet before he would retreat, but it was nowhere near the progress they had made previously. With only 2 days remaining before the deadline, despair threatened to overwhelm her. As she prepared to leave, Sarah, the veterinarian who had originally connected Catherine with the Blackwoods, arrived unexpectedly. "Ruby called me," Sarah explained. "Asked me to look into something." She glanced around to ensure they were alone before continuing. "I accessed Thunder's records through the veterinary database." "Catherine, this horse didn't come from Europe." "What?" "He was bred and trained right here in Texas at Hillcrest Stables." Sarah's expression was troubled. Hillcrest was owned by the Martinez family. The name struck Catherine like a physical blow. 3 years ago, the Martinez family had sold their property to none other than Richard Blackwood, who had promptly demolished the historic stables to build luxury homes. "There's more," Sarah continued. "Thunder, though he wasn't called that then, was their prize stallion. There was an incident during the property transfer. Details are vague, but the horse sustained injuries and was sold to a broker, who apparently later sold him back to Blackwood. The pieces began to fall into place, so Blackwood already knew this horse's history when he bought him. It seems likely, Sarah agreed. But why buy a horse you know is traumatized unless you never intended him to recover? Catherine finished, the truth dawning sickeningly. This whole thing is a setup. Blackwood knew exactly what he was doing when he proposed this wager. As Catherine drove home that night, her mind raced with implications. Blackwood hadn't just expected her to fail. He had orchestrated it, deliberately purchasing a horse with specific trauma, one that he himself might have been responsible for causing. And when natural progress threatened his plan, he had intervened to reinforce Thunder's fear. The question now was why? What did Richard Blackwood stand to gain from such elaborate cruelty? And more urgently, with the deadline fast approaching and their progress severely set back, how could Catherine possibly win a game whose rules had been rigged from the start? Catherine barely slept that night, her mind churning with the revelations about Thunder's past and Richard Blackwood's deception. By dawn she had formed a plan, risky, perhaps desperate, but their only chance. "I'm coming with you today," Ruby announced over breakfast, packing several small cloth bags of herbs and roots into her weathered leather satchel. That horse needs ancient medicine now, not just modern techniques. When they arrived at Blackwood Ranch, they found an unexpected ally waiting. James stood by the round pen, his usual stoic expression replaced by one of barely contained anger. "Mr. Blackwood's instructed me to tell you that tomorrow's event has been moved up to noon instead of sunset," he said tightly. "Says it works better for the press." "He's cutting our time short," Catherine muttered. James nodded, then glanced around before speaking again. "I've worked here for 15 years. Never questioned the boss. But what happened to that horse last night? It wasn't right." He handed Catherine a folded piece of paper. "Security code to the office. Mr. Blackwood's file cabinet isn't locked. Thunder's complete records should be in there." Catherine's eyes widened. "James, you could lose your job." "Some things matter more than a paycheck," he replied simply. "I'll keep watch at the main house. Mrs. Blackwood is hosting a garden club meeting, so they should be distracted." As James walked away, Ruby gave Catherine a knowing look. "People surprise you sometimes." "Let's hope Thunder can surprise us too," Catherine said, approaching the round pen where the stallion stood watchful and wary. "We need a miracle." Ruby surveyed the magnificent animal with experienced eyes. "Not a miracle. Just remembrance. He needs to remember who he was before the pain." For the next hour, Catherine and Ruby worked in tandem, using techniques passed down through generations. Ruby burned a small bundle of sage and sweetgrass, allowing the aromatic smoke to drift through the round pen, while Catherine softly chanted the calming melodies that had previously caught Thunder's attention. Gradually, the stallion's posture began to change. His head lowered slightly, his breathing deepened. When Ruby produced a small clay bowl of herb-infused water and set it in the center of the pen, Thunder cautiously approached, drawn by the familiar scents. "That's right," Ruby murmured. "You remember these medicines. They were part of your training before." Catherine looked at her grandmother in surprise. "The Martinez family worked with me years ago," Ruby explained quietly. "They believed in the old ways, too. This horse was raised with these scents, these songs." With Thunder distracted by Ruby's presence, Catherine seized the opportunity to slip away toward the main house. The information James had provided got her into Blackwood's opulent office, all mahogany and leather designed to intimidate and impress. She found Thunder's file exactly where James had indicated. As she quickly photographed the documents with her phone, the full extent of Blackwood's scheme became clear. Thunder, originally named Spirit Dancer, had indeed belonged to the Martinez family. The accident mentioned in his records coincided precisely with the contentious property transfer 3 years ago. But most damning was a memo from Blackwood's lawyer, discussing the potential liability if the true circumstances of the horse's injuries ever came to light. The document mentioned unfortunate handling, techniques and excessive force used when the animal resisted being removed from the property. Catherine's hands shook with anger as she replaced the file and slipped out of the office. So Thunder's trauma had been directly caused by Blackwood's men during the forced eviction of the Martinez family. And now Blackwood was using that same traumatized animal as a prop in his cruel entertainment. When she returned to the stables, Catherine found Ruby seated cross-legged just inside the round pen, with Thunder standing nearby, not touching her but clearly tolerating her presence. "We've been having a conversation," Ruby said calmly. "He's remembering." Catherine entered slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile peace. "I found proof of what Blackwood did." Ruby nodded. "Good, but right now that's not what he needs." She gestured toward Thunder. "Come, sit, listen." For the remainder of the morning, Catherine followed Ruby's guidance. They didn't try to touch Thunder or force any interaction. Instead, they created a space of calm and safety, alternating between silent presence and soft chanting of the songs his first trainers had used. By midday, Thunder had moved closer, occasionally lowering his head to inspect their still forms. When Catherine slowly raised her hand, palm up, he didn't retreat, a small victory that brought tears to her eyes. Their quiet work was interrupted by the sound of approaching vehicles. Through the stable windows, Catherine could see several expensive cars pulling up to the main house. "The press?" she wondered aloud. "No," came Elizabeth Blackwood's voice from the stable entrance. "Investors. Richard's planning to announce a new development project tomorrow, after your public failure." She approached the round pen, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of Thunder standing calmly near Catherine and Ruby. "You've made progress." "Not enough," Catherine admitted. "Not after last night's setback." Elizabeth's perfectly composed expression flickered. "What happened last night?" Catherine studied the elegant woman carefully before deciding to trust her with the truth. "Your husband and some men deliberately terrorized Thunder, using triggers they knew would reactivate his trauma." Elizabeth's face paled. "You can prove this?" James saw them enter the stables. "And I have documentation of Thunder's history, including how he was injured during the Martinez property acquisition." Something shifted in Elizabeth's carefully maintained facade. "The Martinez case. Richard swore to me that everyone was treated fairly." "They weren't," Catherine said gently, "and neither was their horse." Elizabeth was silent for a long moment, her gaze moving from Catherine to Ruby to Thunder. "My husband is hosting a dinner for those investors tonight. I'll make sure you have the stables to yourselves." She turned to leave, then paused. "Miss Reed, whatever you're planning for tomorrow, be prepared. Richard always has contingency plans." After Elizabeth left, Catherine turned to Ruby. "Do you think we can trust her?" "I think," Ruby said thoughtfully, "that Elizabeth Blackwood has spent many years looking the other way. Perhaps she's tired of the view." They worked with Thunder throughout the afternoon and into the evening, making slow but steady progress. By sunset, Catherine had managed to stand beside him, not touching, but close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his powerful body. When she cautiously extended her hand, he lowered his head, not quite making contact but no longer fearing her presence. "We're running out of time," Catherine said anxiously as darkness fell. "Tomorrow at noon." "Then we work through the night," Ruby replied simply, and work they did. Taking turns resting while the other maintained their gentle presence, they continued their patient vigil. Catherine read aloud from her great-grandfather's journal, stories of healing, of partnership between humans and horses, built on mutual respect rather than dominance. Around midnight, a pivotal moment occurred. Thunder, seemingly of his own volition, stepped forward and pressed his muzzle briefly against Catherine's outstretched hand before retreating. A tentative touch, the first voluntary contact. "He's choosing," Ruby whispered, tears in her eyes. "That's what matters most. His choice." By dawn, Catherine had managed to place the soft rope halter over Thunder's head. He accepted it nervously but without resistance. When she attached a long lead and gently encouraged him to walk the perimeter of the round pen, he followed, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. "We've done it," Catherine breathed, hardly daring to believe their progress. "Not yet," Ruby cautioned. "There's a difference between leading and riding, and Richard Blackwood will have ensured the conditions favor failure." As if summoned by her words, the stable doors swung open to reveal Richard himself, impeccably dressed despite the early hour. "Well, well," he said, genuine surprise registering on his face as he took in the scene, Thunder wearing a halter, standing calmly beside Catherine. "It seems you've made some progress after all." "No thanks to your interference," Catherine replied evenly. Richard's expression hardened. I don't know what you're implying, Miss Reed, but I suggest you focus on the task at hand. You have, he checked his watch with exaggerated precision, just under 5 hours to not only touch this horse but ride him, before an audience of highly distinguished guests. And if we request a more private demonstration? Ruby asked. Richard laughed. The terms of our wager were quite clear. Public success or public failure. I've even arranged for the Martinez family to attend. A touching reunion, don't you think? The calculated cruelty of the gesture left Catherine momentarily speechless. Richard was inviting Thunder's original owners to witness what he assumed would be a spectacular failure, rubbing salt in the wound of their loss. You deliberately traumatized this horse, Catherine said, finding her voice. During the property transfer, your men injured him. A flicker of unease crossed Richard's face before his arrogant mask reasserted itself. Accusations without proof are dangerous, Miss Reed, especially against someone with my resources. He straightened his already perfect tie. I'll see you at noon. After he left, James appeared, his expression grim. Mrs. Blackwood asked me to give you this. He handed Catherine a sealed envelope. And to tell you that the event has been moved to the main arena. There's a full sound system being installed now. Catherine's heart sank. The main arena was at least 10 times larger than the round pen, an overwhelming space for a horse still tentatively rebuilding trust. And a sound system meant noise, commotion, countless potential triggers for Thunder's anxiety. She opened the envelope to find a brief note in elegant handwriting. Cameras will be focused on Richard's reaction throughout. Make it count. Catherine looked up at Ruby, who had read the note over her shoulder. What does she mean? I believe, Ruby said slowly, that Elizabeth Blackwood has finally chosen a side. And it isn't her husband's. James cleared his throat. There's something else you should know. I overheard Richard on the phone last night. He's hired Julian Mercer to be present today. Catherine's blood ran cold. Julian Mercer was an infamous horse trainer, known for rapid results achieved through brutal methods. Methods that often left animals broken in spirit as well as body. He's setting up a contrast, she realized. When I fail, Mercer steps in to demonstrate his superior techniques. We won't let that happen, Ruby said firmly. We have a few hours left. Let's make them count. The remaining time passed in intensive preparation. With Ruby's guidance, Catherine worked to desensitize Thunder to various potential triggers, flapping fabric, sudden movements, even recorded crowd noises played at gradually increasing volume on Catherine's phone. Sarah arrived an hour before the event, bringing an unexpected gift, a small vial of lavender oil. For both of you, she said, embracing Catherine. Calm under pressure. As noon approached, Catherine led Thunder from the familiar safety of the round pen toward the imposing main arena. With each step, she whispered encouragements, reminding him of their progress, reinforcing the trust they had built. The arena came into view, now filled with at least 100 spectators seated in the viewing stands. A platform had been erected at one end where Richard Blackwood stood with a group of men in expensive suits. The investors, Catherine presumed. At the opposite end, a smaller group huddled together. A middle-aged couple with 2 younger adults, their expressions a mixture of hope and apprehension. The Martinez family, surely. In the center of the arena, Julian Mercer waited, his trademark bullwhip coiled at his belt, a visual statement of his philosophy on horse training. Catherine took a deep breath, applying a drop of Sarah's lavender oil to her pulse points and another to her palm, which she gently raised toward Thunder's nostrils. The familiar calming scent seemed to steady them both. Remember, Ruby said quietly beside her, no matter what happens in that arena, you've already won the true victory. You've given him back his choice. With those words echoing in her mind, Catherine led Thunder forward into the arena, where Richard Blackwood waited with a triumphant smile, certain of his victory, and unaware that the ground beneath his carefully constructed world was about to shift dramatically. Hush fell over the crowd as Catherine entered the arena, with Thunder walking calmly beside her. The contrast between her simple jeans and boots and Richard Blackwood's tailored suit could not have been more stark, a visual representation of the values at stake. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard announced through the microphone, his voice booming across the space, welcome to this special demonstration. As many of you know, Miss Catherine Reed has claimed that her gentle methods can succeed where traditional training has failed. She has exactly— He made a show of checking his watch. 30 minutes to not only touch but ride the unmanageable stallion beside her. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Catherine caught sight of Elizabeth Blackwood, seated slightly apart from her husband, her posture rigid with tension. Nearby stood James and Sarah, their expressions conveying silent support. And in the front row, the Martinez family watched intently, the father clutching what appeared to be an old photograph. Catherine took a deep breath and focused solely on Thunder. The stallion's ears flicked nervously at the crowd's sounds, but he remained beside her, trusting her guidance despite his fear. She led him to the center of the arena, deliberately positioning them so that the cameras Richard had arranged would capture every moment. Then she removed the lead rope entirely. A gasp rose from the audience, leaving Thunder free to choose, stay or flee. Thunder stood still, his sides heaving slightly with anxious breaths. Catherine began to hum the melody that had first caught his attention days ago, keeping her movements slow and deliberate as she moved around him in a gradually decreasing spiral. From the platform, Richard's voice cut through her concentration. Perhaps we should add some realistic conditions to this demonstration. After all, a truly trained horse should respond regardless of environment. Before Catherine could protest, a loud cracking sound echoed through the arena, Julian Mercer demonstratively uncoiling his whip. Thunder flinched violently, nearly bolting, but Catherine continued her calm humming, placing herself between the horse and the perceived threat. "Mr. Blackwood," she called out, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "your interference suggests you're not confident in the outcome of our fair wager." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Richard's smile tightened, but he gestured for Mercer to step back. Catherine returned her attention to Thunder, who had remained in place despite his fear, a testament to how far they had come. Slowly, she reached into her pocket and withdrew a small cloth bag of the herbs Ruby had prepared. She opened it, allowing the calming scent to drift between them. Thunder's nostrils flared as he recognized the familiar aroma. His head lowered slightly, some of the tension leaving his powerful frame. Catherine extended her hand, palm up, and waited. Seconds stretched into a full minute of complete silence in the arena. Then, with deliberate choice, Thunder stepped forward and pressed his muzzle into Catherine's palm. Applause broke out from portions of the crowd, quickly hushed as Catherine continued her work. With gentle movements, she ran her hands along Thunder's neck, speaking softly to him all the while. When she produced a simple bareback pad from the bag Ruby had prepared, Thunder accepted it without resistance. Richard's voice cut through again, his tone sharp with disbelief. "The terms specified riding, Miss Reed, not merely touching." "I'm aware of the terms," Catherine replied calmly, not breaking her connection with Thunder. What happened next would later be described by witnesses as something between a dance and a conversation. Catherine positioned herself beside Thunder, one hand resting lightly on his withers. She applied the slightest pressure, then released it when he shifted his weight in response. Step by step, request by gentle request, she communicated her intention. Then, with fluid grace that belied the monumental nature of the moment, she swung herself onto Thunder's back. The stallion stood perfectly still, neither panicking nor bolting. Catherine sat motionless for several seconds, allowing him to adjust to her weight, to make the choice to accept or reject this new development in their relationship. Thunder took a tentative step forward, then another. Catherine made no attempt to direct him with her legs or hands. She simply balanced lightly on his back, allowing him to lead their path. They completed a full circle of the arena this way, in perfect harmony without force or control. When they returned to the center, Catherine slid gently from Thunder's back and stood beside him, one hand resting lightly on his neck. The silence that had gripped the arena erupted into applause. Catherine looked toward Richard Blackwood, expecting to see defeat in his expression. Instead, she saw calculation. "An impressive display of basic techniques," Richard said into the microphone, his voice cutting through the applause. "But hardly the comprehensive training required for a valuable show horse. Perhaps Mr. Mercer can demonstrate what real training looks like." Julian Mercer stepped forward, whip in hand. clearly prepared to create a dramatic contrast to Catherine's gentle methods. But before he could enter the central area, Elizabeth Blackwood rose from her seat and walked deliberately to her husband's side. Without asking permission, she took the microphone from his hand. "Before we continue," she said, her cultured voice steady, despite the tension evident in her posture, "I believe some context is required for today's demonstration." Richard attempted to reclaim the microphone, but Elizabeth smoothly sidestepped him. From the inside pocket of her jacket, she withdrew several folded papers. 3 years ago, Blackwood Enterprises acquired the Hillcrest property from the Martinez family, she continued. During that acquisition, their prize stallion, then named Spirit Dancer, was injured while being forcibly removed from the property by men hired by my husband. Gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd. Catherine saw several phones raised, recording Elizabeth's unexpected revelation. The Martinez family was told their horse had become dangerous and unmanageable following his injuries. They were pressured to sell him at a fraction of his value. Elizabeth's voice remained steady as she unfolded the papers. "I have here veterinary records and internal memos confirming that my husband later repurchased this same horse through a broker, specifically because of his unmanageable reputation." Richard lunged for the papers, but 2 security guards, whom Catherine recognized as being loyal to James, stepped between them. "The purpose of today's event," Elizabeth continued relentlessly, "was never to showcase training methods. It was to publicly humiliate Miss Reed when she inevitably failed with a horse that had been deliberately traumatized and sabotaged." She turned toward the Martinez family. "Mr. and Mrs. Martinez, on behalf of Blackwood Enterprises, I offer my sincere apology for the unethical treatment you received. I am prepared to return your property and your horse, along with substantial compensation, if you are willing to accept." The arena erupted into chaos. Investors pulled Richard aside, their expressions ranging from concern to fury. Journalists who had been invited to cover a simple training demonstration suddenly found themselves with a much bigger story, one involving corporate misconduct and animal cruelty by a prominent businessman. Through it all, Catherine remained at Thunder's side, one hand resting gently on his neck, anchoring them both amid the tumult. She watched as Mr. Martinez approached slowly, tears streaming down his weathered face. "May I?" he asked softly, his hand outstretched toward the horse he had raised from a foal. Catherine nodded, stepping aside while maintaining a reassuring presence. Thunder's ears pricked forward as Mr. Martinez spoke to him in Spanish, words Catherine couldn't understand, but whose meaning was clear in their gentle cadence. Slowly, with the hesitancy of recognition struggling against the memory of trauma, Thunder extended his neck toward his former owner. The moment his muzzle touched Mr. Martinez's palm, there wasn't a dry eye in the vicinity. "He remembers," Mrs. Martinez whispered, joining her husband. "After everything, he remembers." In the days that followed, the repercussions of that afternoon reverberated far beyond Blackwood Ranch. Elizabeth filed for divorce, assuming control of significant portions of the business empire she had helped build. The Martinez family regained their property, not to rebuild their home, they explained, but to create something new. "A sanctuary," Mrs. Martinez told Catherine when they met to discuss the future, "for horses like Spirit who have been broken by cruelty and need a place to remember who they truly are." Catherine found herself offered the position of head trainer at this new sanctuary, a role that would allow her to implement the methods passed down through generations of her family, to work alongside Ruby in teaching others. The community program that had initially driven Catherine to accept Richard's wager received not only the promised $100,000 paid by Elizabeth Blackwood personally, but also substantial ongoing support from several of the investors who had witnessed the demonstration. As for Richard Blackwood, the exposure of his unethical business practices triggered investigations into other aspects of his dealings. His carefully constructed empire began to crumble as partners distanced themselves and clients withdrew. 1 month after the demonstration, Catherine stood in the newly restored round pen at what was once again Hillcrest Stables. Spirit Dancer, reclaiming his true name, moved with growing confidence around the space, his traumatic experiences at Blackwood Ranch gradually being replaced by new memories of safety and respect. "He looks like himself again," Ruby observed, watching from the fence. "He's remembering who he was always meant to be," Catherine agreed. Mr. Martinez joined them, his expression peaceful as he watched his beloved horse. "The old ways you used with him, they are similar to techniques my grandfather taught me. Respect before command, partnership before performance. Those principles seem to transcend cultures," Ruby said with a smile, "though we call them by different names." In the main stable, renovation work continued. What had once been a private showcase for Richard, Blackwood's wealth was being transformed into a healing space where traumatized horses could recover under the guidance of those who understood that true war. Horsemanship began with listening, not demanding. Elizabeth Blackwood had surprised everyone by choosing to remain involved, channeling her considerable organizational skills and resources into establishing the sanctuary on a solid foundation. Reparation, she called it simply when asked about her motivations. James had stayed on as stable manager, finally able to work in an environment that aligned with his values. Sarah provided veterinary care, collaborating with Ruby to integrate traditional medicine with modern techniques. As sunset painted the Texas sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Catherine led Spirit into the paddock, where several other rescued horses now grazed. She removed his halter, watching as he trotted away, then paused to look back at her, not with fear or submission, but with the clear-eyed gaze of a creature who had reclaimed his sovereignty. "That's the true victory," Ruby said, coming to stand beside her granddaughter. "Not the public vindication or the financial support. This moment, when they choose to trust again despite having every reason not to." Catherine nodded, thinking of the ripple effects from that decisive day in the arena. How one act of courage, Elizabeth's Spirit's, her own, had created the possibility for healing that extended far beyond a single horse or family. The sanctuary's first official open house was scheduled for the following weekend. Dozens of families with children who could benefit from equine therapy were expected to attend. Several retired horses from racing and show circuits had already been accepted into the rehabilitation program. 3 young people from challenging backgrounds had begun apprenticeships, learning the gentle methods that Catherine and Ruby practiced. "Your great-grandfather would be proud," Ruby said, linking her arm through Catherine's as they walked back toward the farmhouse. "Not just of what you did, but of what you're building now." Catherine glanced back at Spirit, now grazing peacefully alongside horses who weeks earlier had been considered problematic or dangerous, labels that masked their pain and fear just as Spirit's had. "We're all building it together," she said, creating something new from what was broken. As twilight deepened into night, lights came on in the farmhouse where the Martinez family